All right, so thanks for tuning in, everybody. I am here with my family, Nick and Rochelle, Annette, myself. And so this is something that I've wanted to do for a while. And at different times, I've talked to all three of you guys when we're having conversations, and I've said, I just want to drop a microphone into the room and record it. Because I feel like sometimes we get in these conversations and there's this value that I feel like, man, I wish other people could just listen in on our thought process as we unpack things. And I have the same conversation with Tim from, our friend Tim from Magnified Church. There's times I wish I was just recording the conversation. So today we're talking about reconciliation, and we're talking about reconsidering what we're doing with our time, our energy, our life. In the meantime, kind of using, trying to make the best of a bad situation with the quarantine. I think this is a really good time for us to reevaluate and rethink some things. And so there's been some things that have been kind of in, I think, our collective craw that we're just trying to work out what does it mean to be the church, and just rethinking. So on the subject of reconciliation, I want to read this passage for a minute in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, in verse 17 and 18. It says, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come." And so we kind of talked about that in last week's video. In verse 18, he says, "All this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation." So this word reconciliation is a big junk drawer term that covers vertical and horizontal reconciliation. Reconciliation with God, but also reconciliation with each other. With families who are fighting, with friends that are at odds with each other, and with races and people of different ethnicities, different cultures. So just over the last few weeks, Annette, this has been something that has been not necessarily a new passion, but it has been fanned into flame more recently, and I've heard you talk and engage more, particularly in racial reconciliation. So for you, can you share with us where that came from?
Yeah, so I think it probably started last year at Orange Conference. We got to hear from a Latino pastor and just sharing how the immigration tensions were affecting his congregation that he's pastoring. And I think it started to awaken in me an awareness that these are my brothers and sisters in Christ that are struggling, and it became much more of a people issue rather than just a political issue that I never had to face because it's not in my world. And so then this year, when the news came out about Ahmaud Arbery and that shooting, I don't really know except that the Holy Spirit just I felt so burdened, and to learn and to be part of a solution, even though I don't understand what that means, but just kind of a waking up to this is really where our country's at, and we have to do something. So I think that's kind of where it started for me.
And just so everybody watching knows, that this conversation, which is totally unscripted, is, yes, it's about racial reconciliation, so that's part of this dialogue, but I think what you're sharing leads us into a bigger conversation, which is about listening and humility. So you and I got in a conversation, I think it was last week, and there was a math video that was posted on Facebook, and you ended up getting in a conversation, you entered into the thread, and so I know it's a weird jump, but it'll all make sense in a minute. from racial reconciliation to math, but tell us a little bit about the math video and...
Okay, so there's this math video that someone posted, and it was supposed to be funny. The person who tagged me in it was just being lighthearted. But on the left side of the screen, there's a fireman, and he's doing a 2-digit multiplication problem the traditional way, the way I learned. You know, you have your 35 times 12, you put them over, you multiply. And then on the right side of the screen is a teacher who said, hey, for all you parents that now have to school your kids at home, here is how expanded quotient multiplication works, and she's going to walk you through the process. So that's going on the right side. And she's doing through it real slow so that we understand. On the left side, the fireman does the problem the traditional way. Then he puts on all his fire gear. He goes outside, he hooks up the fire hose, he knocks over a target with the water, he goes back in, he takes all his fire gear off, and he sits down and has coffee, and then the teacher is done with the problem her way. And the point was, this new way is so long and so inefficient and so much harder. And haha, that's the point of the video. And so somebody posted a comment that said, stupid, just stupid nonsense. Somebody else posted a comment that said, the dumbing down of America. And I just, we have one of our kids is really smart in math, and they would rather do it in their head, and the expanded quotient form is how they do it in their head. And so that way made sense to them. And I remember when he was in 3rd grade trying to help him do it the traditional way, and he would get so mad, like, Mom, that's so much longer. This is faster. And so I just commented and said, you know, what I just said, we have a kiddo who this way makes sense. They're actually way faster at it. I said, just be careful when you label a learning method dumb or stupid, because for somebody else that might make sense. So that's kind of what happened. And the person, one of them, deleted their comment instead of, you know, saying, hey, sorry, I never thought about that. And that, I think, made me more angry than the original comment.
Okay, so we're going to dig into this. So in that this video is for church, we'll use code words like the F word.
Okay, so you want me to talk about that?
Yes, because I think
Okay.
this is a critical component of this conversation.
So the third comment that was in there was somebody just put, what the F is this? Like that's cause it's so dumb. And so one of the people that had said it was stupid, when I engaged in it and kind of called them out, they deleted their comment about it being stupid. And then they said, I would be more concerned about the comment with the F word. And that made me mad because I was like, that is not more offensive than you calling something that someone needs dumb. It's just a word, and you want me to focus on that instead of the message you're sending that it's stupid.
Yeah. Which, okay, so that launches us, I think, into this bigger conversation. And Nick, you and I kind of touched on this for a minute last night. That I think our tendency, instead of listening with the intent of learning somebody else's hurt or perspective, we get mad at the messenger, or like we were talking about getting mad at the arrow. And so what it feels like is since maybe the 60s, before I was born, but there was this culture of speaking out. And there was a time, there's always a time to speak out. So you see this turbulent unrest in the 60s, and whether it was civil rights, women's rights, gay and lesbian rights, like those are voices where they wanted to be heard. But I think, or I wonder if what happens sometimes is in church culture, at least, we are so focused on being bold. You got to be bold. You got to speak your mind. And that scale gets tipped to where now we just kind of do this drop the mic thing. Like, I'm going to speak my mind, whether it's social media or it's in person. I'm just going to speak my mind and drop the mic. And I wonder if we have replaced humility with boldness, because I think boldness was supposed to work with humility. I think this is why Dr. Martin Luther King was so effective, is his boldness was interwoven with his humility, and so he could listen. And so I think what happens is we get angry at the arrow. So instead of somebody engaging with your comment, saying, well, hey, be careful, because my kid actually learns really well this way, instead of them receiving it and going, okay, I see your point of view, thanks for helping me. It becomes now they need to be defensive, and they need to be right, and they need to look good, and so that's really a humility issue.
Well, I think it's interesting because you think about boldness. One of the things that affected me greatly when I was a kid, we've talked numerous times, I think, in church about my homophobia, and I just couldn't stand gay people, and primarily because I felt like homosexuality is sin, and I need to stand where the Bible tells me to stand. And when it was an issue of homosexuality, it was really easy to be bold and, man, God's against this, whatever. But, I met people with names, and when I had people with names who were homosexuals, and I realized that Jesus loves each of those individuals, and those people have so many struggles that they have to go through that I'll never have to go through, it completely changed my perspective to humility from boldness, because I realized it's not about an issue, it's about a person, and it's about people. And I think, hearing their stories and hearing who they are really helped me realize the damage I was causing people by just throwing things out there in the middle of the mess, so to speak.
Rochelle, were you going to say something?
No.
You and I were talking, and Nick, you and I talked last night a little bit. I remember when Straight Outta Compton came out in the 90s. And here's where I kind of hope that some of my friends from Magnified Church are watching this, because they're going to love this next segment. So let me step away from NWA for a minute and go to Dr. Larry Crabb. So a couple of years ago, Dr. Larry Crabb, who is this Christian counselor, author, speaker, brilliant mind, love how he thinks. And he writes this book, Fully Alive, and he's addressing traditional gender roles, male and female, but really trying to help the reader hear and see the other gender. So for men to understand their female counterparts and vice versa. So, and one of the things that stuck with me when I read the book was he kind of makes the observation that nobody wants to be invisible. And C.S. Lewis kind of talked about this, nobody wants to be a ghost. Everybody wants to be seen and heard. Your wife wants to be seen and heard. She wants to be valued. She wants to be noticed. Your husband wants to be seen and heard. He just hey, thanks for doing that. Or hey, I noticed that. Or if we're hurting, or we're struggling, or even we're angry, for us to notice what it is that's making us angry. That's 80% of the battle. So now we go back to late 80s, early 90s. There's all this unrest in South Central LA. And you start to see this underground hip-hop movement that didn't get a lot of traction in the late 80s. And then all of a sudden NWA comes along with Straight Outta Compton. And they got this song, F the Police. And all of a sudden everybody's listening now. But what was interesting, and you and I watched the film Straight Outta Compton last year, and I really appreciated seeing more of this story. I knew bits and pieces in the 90s, but seeing more of it firsthand from the guys in the group. Here's some guys that they're trying to point to a problem. Hey, there's a problem here, and nobody sees us, nobody hears us, nobody's doing anything. So eventually they're left with, we're going to get your attention. And it was interesting how the response, whether it was the Christian or the church response, or the moral majority response, or just kind of white America. I don't know. But there was this general response that we need to put parental advisory tags. This is just more evidence that we need to have parental advisory stickers on albums. And so what happened was, instead of seeing the problem, like, oh, hey, there's a problem. There's a reason these guys feel like they have to communicate this way. Instead of going like, hey, what's going on in LA? And we had to wait like another few years until the Rodney King incident was caught on tape before we're like, oh, okay. And so we get mad at the Arrow pointing to the problem because we don't like how the Arrow said it. We don't like that the Arrow said the F word, or the Arrow took a knee during an NFL game, or any number of, we don't like how they did it. And I think we missed this listening and this empathy piece to go, well, why did they feel like they needed to resort to that? What's the real issue here? Because the real issue isn't the music, you know.
Yeah.
So why do you guys think that artists like NWA, or the riots that we're seeing right now in Minneapolis over George Floyd's death during his arrest, why do you think, I'm trying to kind of ask this, why does it come to that, and why is it so hard for us to look at what the Arrow is pointing at? Instead, we look at the Arrow. Does that make sense?
I mean, I just really think that if we look at the Arrow, we have to do something, or we look at the message, we look at what's happening, the problem, and we have to do something about it. And that's hard, and it's uncomfortable, and it costs us something. And so it's easier, I think, to look at the method and say, well, they didn't do it right, and so then that's the drop the mic then in the conversation. Like, well, you didn't do it right, so we don't have to talk about the problem. And we would never do that in a relationship. You know, if your kid is acting out, you don't just say, well, let's fix your behavior. You look at like, man, this is a cry for help. What is the problem they need help with? But I feel like it costs us something if we look at the problem. Like, we have to do something then, or change, or have difficult conversations.
Yeah, and it's a hard thing, right? Because if you start digging deeper, you know, I think I probably held the belief for a long time that if you're going to come in the country, you need to be legal. Like, their process, do it. I don't want to pay my tax money to cover you. It's not my issue. Until we heard that Latino pastor, and I realized that these are real people, and so I could stop at what's right. And is it right for everybody to pay the fair share? Sure, it's probably right. But again, it goes right down to the people thing. I've never lived in Mexico. I've never lived in South America. I don't know how bad it is. I don't know what I need to escape. I just am here in America as a white guy who sees what I see. I know nothing. I haven't asked the question. I haven't talked to the people there. I haven't heard what they had to say. I don't know what their experiences are. So when they come over, when I just land on, but this is what's right, I miss this whole other piece because I'm not listening to anyone. And then when you start thinking about it and realize, so these are people who are trying to find Jesus in a church, who are too afraid to go to church because America has decided we're going to throw you back into this pit. And there's something vastly, that's just not right. And I think, you know, we go back to NWA, and I'll talk about another doctor, Dr. Dre, if you will. And, you know, I think what I remember back from those days were people getting really mad because we were cutting on the police. And I feel like whether it's that or the whole Colin Kaepernick situation, it's people with influence who can make the biggest difference. And I think we are in such a tough spot as white Christians, you know, to decide to step into this fray. We're putting ourselves in the spot of saying, we'll join the losing team. Like, we're going to go over here and we're going to fight for something. We already have it made. Everything is simple for us. So we're going to take our privilege and put it down and say, I'm going to go on this other side and fight because there's something important here. Because they weren't saying F the police because it was just a fun thing to say. There was a reason that there was that much emotion, and we would see it in Rodney King. And man, if we could stop there, that'd be great, but it goes on and on and on and on. And as much as I don't want to see people burning down police stations or robbing targets and looting, there's a piece of me that says, but I get it, because we try to do things the nice legal way, right, when we're protesting, and nothing has changed. We go back to the 60s. Nothing has changed. We continue to see this police abuse of minorities in this country, and to think that as a white guy I could even understand what that feels like is foolish on my part. So, I think it's one of those things that I think for me, I'm sick of sitting on the sidelines and not saying, hey, my brothers are getting beat up. And I don't know what it's like to be black, but I just know it's not right.
Mm-hmm.
I know, I was thinking about this the other day, because I do hear from mostly white people, like, if they're looting and setting fire to things, then they're wrong. And that's kind of like the end of the conversation. And I was thinking about when Jesus flipped over tables in the temple.
Yeah.
And for the first time, I wondered, like, had anybody been saying, hey, this probably isn't right that we're selling stuff at church? Is that, like, or was that the first day that thought had ever come up? But, like, I think it was probably loud. It was disruptive. I mean, he did something violent. And I did make me wonder, like, was nobody listening? Like, they listened then, because it was such a big action. And so I don't think that looting and all of that is right or good, but
right.
I do see this, like, Jesus had to do something to get people's attention that was violent. So I don't know, but I do think it does not negate that there's a problem.
Yeah, and I think, what's harder for me again then is that we can understand this if it's about, the war for our independence. I mean, we were the white people in America and the white people of Britain who owned us, right, and came over here and they owned America. And they were telling us what to do, and it's oppressive. And we didn't just talk nice and say, hey, would you guys stop it? We fought back because we wanted our freedom. We wanted the things that we wanted, and we wanted to be treated equally. So we fought. We didn't just sit there and hand out flowers and be friendly. I mean, we took up guns and did what we needed to do. And so I think what's hard is that I think if I were to talk to most of the people that I find disagreeing with the actions of the minority community, they would 100% support the War of Independence because that was just.
Right.
And that needed to happen. But it's the same exact thing as what we're seeing now. It's the same exact thing.
So, let me go to Colin Kaepernick, and I joke about this sometimes because we have a lot of not sports people at our church, so I love to continue to use football analogies. I'm just going to keep at it. But, so, would one of you two talk about who Colin Kaepernick is, because we've mentioned him a couple times, and what he did, and then we'll kind of talk about people's response to what he did, for anybody who might not know.
Colin Kaepernick played for the 49ers, right?
Yes.
And he was passionate about the police brutality against people of color, and no one was really listening, he felt like. And so he was looking for a way to use his position of influence to force the conversation. And through advice from someone in the military, right? He chose to take a knee during the national anthem. He removed his helmet and he was silent. I mean, just like everyone else, but he just took one knee as a statement to raise awareness that this was an issue.
And it's been interesting. So ever since then, when the subject comes up of taking a knee during the national anthem, it is a hot button. So I guess to me this brings it full circle back to the humility thing. So Jesus tips over the tables in the temple. So you got this guy that normally is mild-mannered, who isn't prone to rash, angry outbursts, and he tips over these tables. He makes a whip and starts driving, the money changers out of the temple, and it got people's attention. But it's the same thing. Then you see when you read through the gospel accounts, like the church leaders at that time, that to them it just fueled their fire that we have got to crucify this guy. Mm-hmm. We got to kill him. So instead of having a moment, an aha moment that said, "Oh man, here's a guy who's normally mild-mannered and just made a scene. Maybe there's a reason for it, and maybe we need to change." They're like, "No, we don't need to change. He needs to go." And I feel like that's exactly what they've done, or a lot of people have done to Colin Kaepernick, is they don't like that it was during the national anthem or whatever, and so here's a guy who does a nonviolent protest, he's trying to be a big red arrow saying there's a problem, and people want to crucify the messenger instead of listen. And I think you had an interesting insight about this need, and this plays into the humility piece, the need to be perceived as good. Mm-hmm. And that came up with the math video as well. You were talking about that.
So I think, with Colin Kaepernick, I think if we would use our imagination for a minute, I think it would help us. Why would a guy risk that amount of money for something that wasn't a problem? Wow, what would make him do that? Instead, we just see his action, and it pushes against what people have labeled themselves as. So, there's a author, Robin DiAngelo, and she talks about this, that we have a binary way of looking at the world, which I did not understand, but she just means we have two options. You're a good person or you're a bad person. You're a racist or you're not a racist. You're you're a sinner or you're a saint. I mean, it's just there's two categories. And so, of course, everyone wants to label themselves as well, I'm a good person or I'm not a racist or whatever. And her, she puts forth this idea that instead of a binary way, a category, that it's a continuum. So we are on a path towards being not racist, a path towards being like Jesus, a path towards being a good person, and we're all on that journey. Because when you have a binary way of looking at it, and you've said, I'm a good person, I'm not racist, and then someone comes to you and says, hey, there's a racism problem in America, well, that butts up against your identity now. Well, no, there cannot be a racism problem because I've labeled myself as not a racist. Or, hey, you hurt me. No, that can't be because I've labeled, I am a good person, that's my identity. And so it stops us from listening to someone to care for them, because we're trying to protect the identity that we've created. And so if I can just say, I'm on this continuum towards being not racist, and someone says, hey, that was offensive what you said, it allows me at least the opportunity to say, I could see that. I have work to do. I'm on a path. Or if someone says, you hurt me, I could say, I could see how that's possible because I'm on a path towards being like Jesus, but I'm not, my identity is not as a good person. Mm-hmm. 'Cause I don't think you can listen to someone if what they're saying is attacking the identity that you're hanging on to. Or it's very hard to really listen to them.
Yeah, this need that I think sin brought into our life, this need to look good. the gospel just, I feel like, upends that. You know, when Jesus said, you're so busy pointing out the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye, but you missed the plank in your own. And there's really a couple things there. And the first one is, I think he's talking about blind spots. We all have blind spots. Mm-hmm. And I think he's trying to say, you know, look in the mirror first. And then to go a step further, when you look at the narrative of Scripture, it's a narrative that does not paint the human race in a really great light. Like people who are critics of the Bible, and they're like, well, look at all this torture and racism and sexism but if you were to actually sit down and give it a careful reading, none of that's being promoted by our Heavenly Father. That is us, and this is God trying to redeem mankind's story. And so when God, says things like, your heart is desperately wicked and it's sick beyond a cure. When your righteous acts, even the good things you do are like filthy rags, because they're all my motives. All of my motives are stained with some degree of selfishness. Mm-hmm. Do I want people to watch this video and have it be a conversation starter? Yes. Do I really hope it gets a lot of likes and thumbs up? Yes. Everything I do is stained. Yeah. And there's something about being secure in grace that my badness, like the binary thing, I don't have to live in those binary compartments of good or bad. I can be both at the same time, that I am good and bad, weeds and wheat. I am a work in progress. I am saved by grace. So the problem with the world is me. The problem in this family relationship, first, I got to look in the mirror. I got to look at the plank in my own eye, look at my own, how do I relate? Do I relate in a way that is just trying to get something from somebody? Am I relating in a way that just makes me look good? So I feel like reconciliation starts with an inside look. It's a humility look. I don't know where I was going with that, but it was a great path.
So I think one of the things that I think about, I just this morning had an aha. I was listening to this lecture by Christina Cleveland. And you ever have somebody say something and it's like an aha moment for you, and then you think, I should have known that, but I just didn't. Yeah. So she said during her lecture, she made the comment that she was going through a reconciliation process with a couple churches that wanted their churches to have relationships with each other. So she had come up with this plan, and the leadership was like, wow, that's really going to be costly. And she said, yup. Reconciliation is costly, and if you think about our reconciliation to God, it was bloody and painful and hard, and it cost a lot. Jesus died. And I realized in that moment that I picture reconciliation as the videos on Facebook where a military personnel surprises their loved ones and coming home, and it's makes you cry, and they that is what I picture reconciliation feels like. In my head, when I say reconciliation, that is the nice, warm feelings. But if I think about Jesus reconciling me, really, it was very hard and uncomfortable and difficult and painful and bloody. And then, the good, happy feelings came after, the resurrection. But I think, for me, when we've had hard conversations and we're working through stuff, I feel this is... I don't like this, and I just want to run away from it. I don't want that because it feels yucky. I don't know a better word to say it. And realizing, if we're going to say the work of reconciliation, to somehow embrace that it's going to be hard and uncomfortable sometimes and difficult. I don't know why that just occurred to me today that... It doesn't mean that it never feels good, but I think I want it to always feel good.
Okay, so I love that you said that. Because, so if we go to Christ's reconciliation work on the cross, he absorbed something that he didn't do. And I think whether it's family reconciliation, church reconciliation, political or racial, that I feel like there's always been this white talking point that says, why are you mad at me? I didn't own slaves.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I might have said that years ago.
Yeah. And at some point, reconciliation is going to require one party to say, it's what's that phrase from Will Smith? He tells his kids, it's not your fault, but it's your responsibility.
Yeah.
And I think, like Jesus, like it wasn't his fault, but he took it on as his responsibility out of love.
Mm-hmm.
And so for us as Christians, there's an aspect of how we relate to each other, to friends and family, where at some point we're going to have to absorb something we didn't do. And it might mean saying sorry for something, even though you didn't do anything wrong. Just saying, hey, I'm really sorry that we're in this spot, and what can we do to fix it? And then listening.
So as you're talking though, I'm thinking of a situation where that I could apply that. And my first response internal is like, no, I don't want to do that. I didn't do anything wrong. But then that for me, I have to go back to that binary, like, okay, do I need to be a good person? Like, what if I'm just on the path and I could say, I could have hurt someone without knowing it, because I'm not there yet. I'm on a path, but I feel that like that internal pushback, even though I know you're right. I have to I guess just be aware of it. I think I might always have that gut reaction, but to be able to recognize it at least and stop that train.
So do you think it's partially because we don't understand the stakes? So what I was thinking was that, okay, so Jesus, the last thing he does before he leaves is he prays, right? So he has this prayer before he takes off, and the prayer is for unity of believers. And the reason for unity of believers is that then non-believers will know that God is real. Like, that's the one thing that's going to show that this is a legit thing. And I think I always thought to myself, what that means is that churches shouldn't be fighting with each other, and we need to be kind to each other. But I think over the last couple of years I've got a vastly different thought about that, because it's normal for people who like each other at the core to get along. That's not abnormal. And so what I think Jesus is praying for there is that people who don't like each other, who have issues with each other, have unity. And because they have unity, this is what shows that God is a real God to the world. And so when I think about things like this, I think maybe one of the reasons it's so hard to have reconciliation with people who've wronged you, maybe you're not even in the wrong. Maybe you're just a victim. Yeah, that happens once in a while. Maybe it's so hard is we just don't get the stakes. We don't understand that if I lay down my pride, this is a testimony to the rest of the world that God's real. And because we don't necessarily see eye to eye, that's a lesser issue than the fact that somebody might find Jesus because we were willing to lay down our weapons and just reconcile. So I just wonder if it's maybe we don't get the stakes there. We don't understand how important it is.
So you joined a Facebook group specifically about this topic, about having a conversation, because I think one of the things I've been thinking about, because this is a fire that has been building in you, and I think by nature then it catches the people around you, and honestly the racism issue for me slowly has started to fan into flame the last couple years, but it wasn't a thing because for me growing up, I grew up in inner city Grand Rapids. You can open up my high school yearbook and just do the math. I did this one time just because I was bored and curious. Very few white people, and the number I came up with, 2/5 white people, so less than half. So I grew up as a minority. All of my friends were, there was a sprinkling of white people, but all of my friends were black, Hispanic, and Asian. My sister is Asian. And so in that environment for us growing up, we would make race jokes all the time. But it was a disarming thing because, the nature of comedy is either something's really close to the truth or really far from the truth. And we really felt like it was so far from the truth. Like there was no animosity. So my black friends would make white jokes. I would make Hispanic jokes. We'd joke about just, it was a safety net there. And then I get into my adult life and I'm not in the inner city anymore and I don't have that circle of friends anymore. But I think somewhere in the back of my brain growing up, we all just thought racism was this thing that expired in 1969. We fixed that problem and we can move on. We're all sharing schools together, so I didn't purposely have my head in the sand. It just wasn't ever part of my everyday anything. I would hear stories, but it always seemed like they were backwoods, deep south stories. So I was like, oh, that's a southern problem. And more stories, I'm realizing like this isn't a southern problem. And really this is a spiritual problem. Because I won't go down that bunny trail right now, but this I think the last couple of years, there's been more of a nudge for me as a believer that if we're going to be ministers of reconciliation, that I can't get away from God's intent in Scripture that part of reconciling people to Him is that we become a voice and a set of ears for people who aren't being seen or heard. Mm-hmm. Going back to Larry Crabb, like everybody wants to be seen and heard. NWA wants to be seen and heard. The gay and lesbian community and transgender community want to be seen and heard. They just want to open a dialogue and feel like we could sit down at the table and it's safe and we can just talk. So the last month maybe or two, you were invited to a group, and I thought there was some real wisdom in how this group handles things. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, a friend of mine invited me to this Facebook group called Be the Bridge, and it's a social media group, but it's also they meet in groups in real life and have Bible studies that are a diverse group of people. And when you join the group, you have to agree to a couple things, and one of them is that there's all these learning units, videos, and articles that you have to read and educate yourself on race issues. And then you have to agree to 3 months of silence in the group. And you can't, they specifically say, that does not mean you join the group and then you check out for 3 months and then you come back and start commenting. It means that you are actively listening. So you have to read the posts and you can like them to show that you're listening, but you just have to listen for 3 months and to come around to the other side of the table and like see what it's like for other people and what they're feeling and how they react to the news, and you just have to listen.
Which I think is brilliant. When you told me that you can't say anything for 3 months, I just thought there's so much wisdom in that. What do you guys think about that?
Very interesting.
I didn't know if you had more to add, so I didn't know.
No, I just think it's very interesting.
Yeah.
So Rochelle, let me
That's
ask.
for me.
let me ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
So we've known you guys, I think, coming up on 22, 23 years. Obviously, there was a gap in there where we didn't know you guys, and then we knew you guys again. And so I know at least in the last 10 years, you in particular have become a better listener. Like when I first got to know you guys, there was so much animosity that surrounded you. Like every relationship you were in, it seems like eventually there was always tension, and you really wanted to be heard. Like you did sometimes very extreme things to be heard and to be seen. But I have noticed this growth in you that it seems like that focus is changing from I need to be seen and heard to I need to see others, listen to others, and you've definitely become a different type of listener. Can you speak to some of that process over the last decade? Because it's always a slow process, right, for any of us. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, I think that all came about me being where I'm at right now. I learned the hard way. I don't want to speak into, everybody knows I dealt with depression for a long time, and it was really serious for a while. And, I've had to learn the hard way to listen, because I was always fighting about, I need you to hear me. I need you to understand me. But through the grace of God, He just taught me humility, because the more I spoke out, the deeper my depression got. And the farther people they just left, The more I had to be heard, the less friends I would have. And so I just think God showed me the hard way, humility, and to just sit and listen. And now I find it as a gift, because it's really hard to explain. It's really hard to explain. I'm trying to write a book right now on worship, and this is actually coming out in my book. Really hard. God, I can't say anything else except for God's done something in my life. The more I'm quiet, the more at peace I feel, and the more I feel like I can speak to people. People are coming to me now left and right. How did you get through this? How did you get through that with depression? And it's like, what? I had to stop and say that I'm not going to explain myself anymore. I'm just going to listen to you. Just be quiet, because my security is in Christ, and it doesn't matter what I think, it doesn't matter what you think, it doesn't matter if you understand me or not. I'm just going to love. I don't even know if I'm explaining this right at all.
You're great.
So I think to answer your question, it came about the hard way. Came after years of trying to explain myself and pushing people more and more away. The more I talk, the more I push people away. So the more I was quiet, the more God spoke to me, and I could hear Him, and I could listen to others. I don't know.
Do you think, so like one of the things I've noticed is that when we were first talking about your depression, and I would suggest that you were anything less than good, you'd get really mad.
Mm-hmm.
When I would say you need to just accept the fact that you're bad.
Mm-hmm.
And you would get infuriated with me. And so I think one of the things that I've noticed is that you're much more able to recognize the depth of your depravity, right? Like you're willing to say, yep, I am capable of these horrible things. And I think kind of tying that into the discussion is I think that is humility, like to see, I am capable of these things. I think it's like you talked about where you're on this continuum of moving towards something, but I think what you realize is I don't have to be good. Like I don't have to be labeled as this. I can be on my way to that. And maybe you're not even close, or maybe you are close, but it doesn't really make any difference because you're moving forward. At least that's what I've noticed.
yeah, honestly, as soon as I kind of said to myself, I am not good. Only through Christ am I good, that actually brought freedom to me because
Yeah.
Christ is perfect. So for me to be good through Christ is like the best thing in the world. But me to try to be good on my own is not even possible.
Yeah.
So I guess I found freedom in realizing that. And freedom, peace, joy.
Well, and
All
like
those things.
it seems like what you're saying then too is that it allowed you to push pause on your need to be heard and
Yeah.
listen to others, which I think is like I would never say you have to stop feeling bad, but like you said it let you just be quiet and
Yeah.
pause that need to listen to somebody else.
In my years ago, I remember sitting in my car and Focus on the Family came on the radio station like at lunchtime, and it's not a radio show I ever used to listen to. I don't even, to this day, I don't even know how it is I ended up listening to it. I just stumbled on it and stayed on it. And I'm glad that I did though that day. I think that's Josh McDowell, if I remember right, but he would do this syndicated radio show. And there was an episode about listening. And this story has always stuck with me. So he's counseling with this family. Dad, deacon at the church, upstanding member of the community. Daughter is completely going off the rebellious deep end, and she's disrespectful, she's mouthy, she's sullen, she's depressed, she's angry. So the family goes for counseling. As Josh listens to the story, he starts to get an inkling of what's really going on, and that the dad's style of relating is kind of this, I need to be the good one, a bit of spiritual pride. I need to look good, I need to be good, I need to be perceived as good. So Josh gives the family homework, and particularly to the dad, and he says, I want you guys to come back in 3 weeks. And between now and then, he gave them instructions. He said, your daughter, for the next 3 weeks, can say anything she wants to you, in any way she wants. It means she can use whatever language or words. And Dad, you, for 3 weeks, cannot say anything except if you want to reiterate what she said. Like, what I hear you saying is this, and then you can't comment, you can't fight with her, you just have to listen. And the family came back in 3 weeks, and it was revolutionary, the turnaround. The dad said that first week he hated Josh McDowell. He thought this was the worst advice that he'd ever gotten. His daughter was unhinged and unglued, and he's like, this is worse than it was before. But something happened over that 3 weeks where first the dad had a change, where he started to realize there's a theme here, what my daughter's telling me. Maybe I'm part of the problem. Maybe I'm a big instigator of this problem. Maybe I'm not a good listener. And then the more the daughter felt seen and heard, it stopped feeling invisible. Her rants began to lessen and subside to the point where 3 weeks later, dad and daughter were able to have a dialogue and work on the real issue. Now that at least some of the emotion, that hot, infectious pus has been drained out of the wound, if you will, and now we can just work on what is broken. And that story has always fascinated me, that there's something about, and I think of Ecclesiastes, like there's a time to speak, and then there's a time to listen. There is a time to hey, my voice needs to be heard. But then there's a flip that, all right, there's a time for me to shut up, and I need to listen to you as well.
I think one of the things I like about the whole to be the bridge thing where you wait 90 days to talk is exactly that. Like, I think one of the things that occurs to me, and it might have been you in a meeting sometime over the last few years, talking about the way women think about things versus the way men think about things. And just describing all the things you have to do when you go to a grocery store, where to park, make sure there's enough light, make sure there's nobody around, things that I as a man would never ever have thought of or don't occur to me because they don't matter to me. And realizing that even in a simple trip to the grocery store, there's 17 things that you have to think about that I never once would think about. And so how could I imagine that I'd ever understand what a woman thinks like? Like, I can't, because I've never been a woman, and I don't have the same concerns. And so I think even with Be the Bridge, I think that's the same thing, right? So you have a group of African Americans, black folks, minorities inside this. I've never been one. And so to be in a spot where I can hear the words and see how they feel to me, probably would reveal a lot of my heart when I got mad about something. And so I think, like, because I've never been anything other than a white guy, to think that I can think like anybody else does and understand exactly how they might feel is wrong. I can imagine, and hopefully my imagination gets really, really good, but I can't know. So I think it's genius for have them wait the 90 days before you can comment. I think it just really helps you see some things you weren't going to see any other way.
Yeah, I've been listening to or watching the Red Table Talk. It's on Facebook Watch, and it's Jada Pinkett Smith, who's Will Smith's wife, and her mom, Gammy, and their daughter, Willow. And there was an episode with Chelsea Handler, who did this documentary on white privilege. And Gammy is just kind of fed up with the conversation because she's older, and she's been doing this a long time, and she's like, I don't know what I want. I don't know what I want you white people to do. And Jada Smith said, I know what I want. I want, at the end of the day, I want you to believe us and have some compassion.
Yeah.
Which I've actually, Rochelle, heard you say in relation to depression. Like, can you just believe me that it's this bad? And I think I'm guilty for a long time of thinking, like, racism's not that bad. And the audacity that I live in a white neighborhood. I'm in a white family. I have a whole white world. How would I know to say that?
Yeah.
But to believe someone else when you're listening to them is such a gift, and I think you shouldn't have to fight for that, to be believed that your experience really is. And I think we all filter things, so sure, it can be your perspective on that experience, but it's still their experience, whether we're talking about gender or depression or race or whatever, to be able to believe, and like you said, use your imagination to come around and say, boy, what would it be like if that was true? Oh, that would explain, I can imagine why they do these things then.
Well, and if you can't listen to somebody, like if your first response is, I need to fight you, where is there ever going to be a bridge built? Right. I mean, so you have to start somewhere, and I mean, I think probably just believing what you're told is a great place to start. Because there's nuance in every conversation. I mean, there's so much level of depth and different perspectives. But if you start with the I don't believe you, you're never going to get to the conversation in the end that may have ended up being the same conversation you would have had in the beginning of I don't believe you, but a whole different perspective on it. It just, there's no way to find peace without listening. There's no reconciliation unless people can listen to each other.
And I like the phrase you used. I have a shameless plug, also working on a book on this subject of listening. And there's a section there just called pause. At least that's what it's called right now. That having, like you said, can you push pause on your emotions for a minute? And this is something, as I've gotten older, is becoming more of a habit. I think in my 20s and 30s, it was, you said something and I would respond to that something, and to have a pause. When I read a text that, boy, rubs up against me like sandpaper, I don't have to respond to that right now. I can pause and I can think, and maybe I'll respond in 5 minutes. But my first response might not be the best or the most productive. It might be right, it might not be loving. And one of the things we talk about all the time is it's a horrible thing to be right only. And so, like you said, can you just push pause on your way of seeing a situation, or push pause on your feelings for a minute, so that you can push play on somebody else's and really, hey, so what I hear you saying is this. And I think that takes practice. It takes intentionality, because I don't think any of us do that naturally. So to kind of wrap this up for today, obviously the four of us, we're not gonna end racism, but what we can do, and I think what our church family can do, like New Vintage isn't going to solve racism by ourselves, and that's not our goal. We can be our little part of this story. So when it comes to our little part and our part as a church family, how can we be bridge builders? How can we be better listeners?
Well, I've been asking that question for about a month. Tell me what to do. Be the Bridge actually put out, they get asked that a lot, as you can imagine. And so they put out steps, and I think I forget a couple of easy ones because I get lost in I can't go fix the judicial system, and I can't fix the police department. I don't know how to do that. And so a couple of their things are pray. Pray about it. Right now, I know it might seem silly. I am praying for friends from other races so that I can listen, because I don't have any friends right now like that. And then when they talk about educating yourself, so that's why I started listening to the Red Table Talk. I just want to listen to people of color, and I have to go out and find them because they're not next door, they're not in my church, and so I'm going to go listen to some of those resources that are out there, and there's a lot of them. I'm going to read books by people of color and try to educate myself, and then have those conversations with the people that are in my circle about race. And that right now, for me, that's all I know how to do.
I've been thinking the same thing. I don't know what to do. I grew up in the inner city schools as well, at least junior high and elementary school. And being a white person, I was actually the minority too. It wasn't until I got to high school and I realized there's hardly any colored people here, and I was like, that was so weird to me. I just thought everywhere had a mix, quite a mix of people. So I don't know. So over the years, getting older, I found more and more stuff about racial discrimination, and I don't know, I feel like I'm just oblivious to it because I just didn't grow up that way. But the only thing I know how to do right now is just that my friends that I have that are of color. I had quite a few growing up, and I'm friends with some of those people on Facebook. It's just to encourage them and let them know that I care just on a personal level. That's really all I know how to do, but because just puts me in tears when I see this stuff, and feels like a really, really big problem.
Almost helpless feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, for me it's probably a little different take. I play ball with a bunch of guys who, aren't white guys, and I think one of the things I look forward to is having the opportunity to just ask questions. What is life like for you? Well, how do you feel about in the midst of all this crap going on? How do you feel? But I think the other thing for me is that to lean into my gifts. I'm supposed to be a prophet, and I think there's a piece for me that militance comes into it. Or maybe that doesn't come in for other people, but I think when I stay silent about things that I know are wrong to keep peace, or maybe just to look good to my white friends, I'm doing a disservice to people. So I think I can't be anyone's hero. I'm not going to change the world, but instead of just being quiet and letting people say what they need to say, providing an opposition voice that says, yeah, that's not okay. I think that's probably the piece that I need to do.
Thank you guys for sitting down to have this just off-the-cuff conversation. If you're still tuned in, thanks for sitting in the conversation. So have your own conversations. And this isn't just a race conversation. Reconciliation is a big junk drawer term that is all of life. Reconciliation, people with God, people who are apart from God, your neighbors, your coworkers, your family members. But then it does extend out. Reconciliation, friends, family, races. So we want to get this conversation started where maybe we weren't having that conversation, and want you guys to as well. If you need assistance during this quarantine, as always, feel free to reach out to us at newvintagebiblechurch.org if you'd like to continue or start to support this ministry. You can also click on the contribute button at newvintagebiblechurch.org, and we look forward to being all in the same room together as soon as possible. Peace out.